I just recorded this whole video and I didn't turn the camera on. So today we're going to be talking about floor insulation in your Sprinter van. So let's roll that intro and we'll see you on the other side. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Scott Adamson, and today we're going to be talking about insulating the floor on your Sprinter van. So this is a step that I see a lot of people in the DIY van build community, they kind of skip out on. They don't understand the importance of it, and I get it to a degree. It's kind of sometimes hard when you're working on a budget to justify spending money on stuff that you don't see at the finished product of the build. But let me tell you, this is the part of the build that kind of separates the professionals from the DIY community. Sort of the ingenuity and the genius of these van builds is all of the planning and systems and everything that goes into the van that you don't see. It's the electrical, it's the plumbing, it's the insulation, it's all of that stuff that is unique to the van builds. I know the cabinets are beautiful and paint colors and cushions and lighting and all of that, but really none of that stuff is unique. That's kind of basic carpentry stuff. The stuff that you're really going to notice is from the professionals and the DIYs is the attention to detail that you don't see in these builds and having that all done properly. Sort of a quick disclaimer on my van build, I am using the Van Life Tech Radiant Infloor heat system. So a few items on this are kind of exclusive and only required if you're using this system. But the rest of it is super relevant and almost matches my previous van's floor insulation system to a T. So I'm going to go over everything and kind of why I did it. All right, so step one on my van was I went with the lizard skin, which is a sound deadener and ceramic insulation. It's not really an insulation, so I'm letting you know it's not a replacement for insulation. It's just what they call the product. They call the one product the sound control, and then the other product the ceramic insulation. For me, I use it mainly for its sound deadening properties and as a moisture break and thermal break. It's not an insulator. So that was step one, was the moisture barrier. The next step was I installed a peel and stick duct insulation over the entire floor of the van. That duct insulation is sticky on one side, so it sticks down over top of the lizard skin, and the other side is foil face, which helps radiate heat back into the vehicle that might be escaping. Putting the insulation in is as easy as that. The third level of the insulation floor detail was to install 1-inch Polyiso insulation in the floor. I used this on my last van build. It works amazing. It's easy to work with, easy to cut, easy to install. So basically what we did is we installed it into the floor, and then we used foil tape or aluminum tape to tape off all the seams and kind of make it so it was one uniform piece in the van. The benefit of using Polyiso is that it actually has a very high R value per inch. I think it's around R8 in the floor detail when you're all done. I'll double check that and put it up in the video, but the R value per inch of Polyiso is quite high. It's one of the most efficient insulations you can use. After I had the Polyiso installed, it was now time to install sort of your subfloor. For a lot of people here, what they're going to do is they're just going to reuse the factory floor that comes with their Sprinter van, which is 100% what I would have done if my van came with one. But since it didn't, I had to cut a subfloor out. So I used 1/2-inch Baltic birch plywood. It took me 3 4x8 sheets, and I was ready to go. One thing that I want to let you know, when you're installing the floor into the van, I use a combination of the factory nutserts. I just made sure I plugged them before I did the lizard skin so they were reusable. And then we installed about 10 more nutserts into the van. And for those of you that aren't familiar with nutserts, basically what it is a threaded insert that goes onto the end of a rivet tool, and you drill a pilot hole, and then you put it in and you clamp the rivet tool, and now you have a nice threaded insert. And it's just a really nice, clean, easy way to fasten on the van. It gives you basically reusable holes, because if you're using self-tappers and stuff like that, once you screw it in once, if you have to screw it out, it's really hard to use the same hole because there's no new material for it to bite into. It's easier than through bolting, because sometimes on the other side of these vehicles, you can't always get your hand, or you can't always see where you need to put the nut. So with a riv nut or a nutsert, or plus nut, they're all the same thing pretty well. slight variations. You don't have to do anything under the vehicle. Everything's top side. Once you've got it in, you just bolt it in from the top. So it works great. The one sort of trick when you are installing it is you need to know where to mark your wood floor to line up with the nutserts. So what we did is we actually took some bolts. We use mainly M8s, which is a metric size bolt and nutsert, as opposed to like a 1/4 or a 5/16 bolt or something like that. We were using mainly metric on this van because a lot of stuff is metric on the Sprinter van. So we're using M6s, M8s, and M10s. Well, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, how did we mark the floor? So what we did is we took M8 bolts because we were using M8 nutserts. We cut the heads off, ground them to a point, and then threaded them back in the holes. Once they were threaded into the holes, they were sticking up with a bit of a sharp point. We laid down the 1/2-inch Baltic birch floor. We hit all the areas with a hammer to leave an indentation in the bottom of the board where we needed to drill through. Because we needed to drill a pilot hole through the bottom, and then we used a Forstner bit to round out the top so that the bolts sit flush and didn't protrude out of the floor, so that we had a nice flat look. Because for a lot of people, this is the surface that you'll be installing your finished floor on, so you need everything to be flat. In my case, I have a couple more layers because I'm using the Radiant Infloor heat system, but for a lot of people, this is the finished floor. A quick little pro tip here is that when you are installing it, because if you are making your own floor, you're gonna have 2 seams because you need to use 3 4x8 sheets to make it work. Have fasteners as close to the seams, 2 inches back from each seam kind of along it, so that you can level it off. If you have your fasteners too far away from the seams, what's going to end up happening is when you fasten it all down, you're going to get gaps and differences in height between the 2 seams. So you want the fasteners close so you can level it all off, and then your finished floor can go on top nice and smooth. For me, since I wasn't putting my factory floor on here, the next step for me was to install a radiant barrier. The radiant barrier is basically a massive foil sheet that goes below my radiant infloor heat loop, which is the next part that gets installed, and that helps radiate all the heat again back up into the van, keeping everything up. We don't want to lose any heat underneath the van. We want to keep everything inside the van. That's kind of the goal of the floor insulation, is keep the heat in. Quick side note, before we did install the Baltic birch floor, when we had it all cut and ready to go, we did lay it out and we did trace our finished floor, which is the marine vinyl. So that's all ready to go. So we didn't have to deal with the full sheet inside the van. It's all cut, ready to go. And we did trace and cut out this radiant heat floor the same way. So it was all cut to the perfect size. All we had to do was put it in the van and install it. With the radiant sheet, you don't even really need to glue it down or adhere it down. But since I had the contact cement and the sprayer, we just gave it a quick spray and stuck it down to the floor so it stayed in place until we were ready to put the radiant heat floor system on top of that. Last step, if you are doing this step, would be to install the Van Life Tech Infloor Radiant Heat Loop, which comes it's a pre-made kit. It's really easy to work with. You can probably get the floor loop installed with 2 people. I think I could do it on my second van in like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours probably, with 2 people. First one took a little longer, just figuring out how everything works, but it's actually super easy and super intuitive. Troy at Van Life Tech made an awesome kit. I highly recommend it if you are interested in the Infloor Radiant Heat System. So now that your floor is all installed, you can see that our total finished floor is, 1.5 to 2 inches. I'll get an exact measurement, throw it in the video. And yours would be, about a 1/2 inch less if you weren't using the Infloor Radiant Heat System, which is the last sort of, 1/2 inch of that system. So it does build up the floor a decent amount, but it's highly worth it. You're not going to regret it. It makes the van so much more efficient. And just don't skip the insulation step. Make sure you take your time, do it right, do it properly. You won't regret it. So let's just recap quickly on my sort of insulation floor detail that I use in my Sprinter vans. Again, first I've got the moisture barrier, which I use lizard skin. Then I use the peel and stick foil face duct insulation, followed by 1-inch Polyiso, followed by either the factory wood floor, or a 1/2 inch Baltic birch floor, fastened down to the floor with riv nuts. After that, we installed the radiant sheet, then the in-floor radiant heat loop, which will now be followed by our finished floor once we get the in-floor all plumbed in and ready to go. So again, I hope you found this video helpful, informative, and you're enjoying following along with the videos. If you have any other questions, let me know in the comments. I'll do my best to get back to you. And if you've been following along, you do know that we did launch a website. It's thewonderful.co. And we've got tons of, van life and van build information on there for you as well. So be sure to check that out. And last thing, if you aren't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you click that subscribe button, click the like, and we'll see you in the next video.